Hi, everyone. Okay, so welcome back. We are going to be going into our second module for this 3-week class, which is, I guess, the second week of class. And the theme of this whole module is all about narrative or storytelling. So if the first module was all about sort of understanding different techniques behind the language of film, I guess you could look at this module as focusing on the story that we're trying to communicate with that language. So today we're going to talk a little bit about screenplay writing, and that'll set you up for watching the film, which is all about screenplay writing. But we'll talk about that in the next one. So let's just dive in here since we're going to be talking about storytelling and narrative. Just to clarify, an important thing that I see get conflated a lot. So we all probably know what a story is, right? Story and narrative, I'll use those words interchangeably. It's kind of just everything we're trying to tell. It includes the setting, the characters in a world, right? All of the stuff that we put into the screenplay, which the screenplay, since I've already used this twice now, is sort of the blueprint, if you will, for what the story is in a film. It's everything that's supposed to happen. But the plot is how all of those things that are supposed to happen get structured. So an example of this would be like, okay, everybody knows the story of Cinderella, but there's lots of different ways that Cinderella has been adapted, and sometimes even the order of events could be played around with, where you find out what happens at the end of the story at the beginning, or things like that. So those are all issues dealing with the plot, whereas the overall story stays the same, like what happens, but the plot is kind of what gets played with, if you will, quite a bit when, for instance, something's being adapted for the screen or things like that. So I just wanted to clarify those two terms. Um, and as I just mentioned, what the screenplay is what, and actually another word for screenplay would be script. So if I or any of the videos that you're going to be watching for this unit mention the script, they're talking about this idea of a screenplay. And this is kind of the instructions, the blueprint for what the film is supposed to contain narratively. And I'm being really specific about saying what it should contain narratively because the other things, the music, the visuals, all of these other artistic elements are more open to interpretation. If you're a screenplay writer, you're really focused on that narrative, you're focused on what the characters say, the order of events. Um, but all of the ways that that gets presented in terms of what it looks like is going to be up to other people, like the producers and directors and Foley artists and things like that, right? It's not the screenwriter's job, in other words, to figure out what stuff looks like, what stuff look like. Um, and what's really interesting about a screenplay is like, because, there's not a whole lot of details in it besides just the brass tacks of what's happening. One page of screenplay is only going to equal about a minute of the film. So that gives you an idea of how long screenplays technically are if you're talking about like a 120-minute film or something, but that's a rough estimate. But I like mentioning that because I think it speaks to how bare bones the screenplay technically is compared to all of the other things that you could put in there. A great example I like to bring up about this, and I think this is one of the questions on the quiz, is I took this screenshot of a part of the Shining screenplay, which was written by not just Stanley Kubrick, but Diane Johnson. And it mentions, okay, high angle. Okay, so there's a little bit of information that you get, a high angle of Danny playing on the floor with toys, toy cars and trucks, camera tracks up and back, yellow ball rolls in front of now, and also keep in mind that, in this case, the person who was going to be making the film was also writing the screenplay. So it might not even be so typical that you would get that sort of direction. But even so you get a little bit of direction, but most of it's just like, yeah, we want a scene of Danny playing on the floor, brass tacks, and this ball's going to come in because that's what's advancing the narrative, right? But think about all of the other things in this scene that aren't in the screenplay, like the fact that you have this, funky 70s carpet, which, by the way, I can't remember if this was mentioned, in other discussions of The Shining, but where actually the pattern shifts. So you have this shot of Danny, and in the next shot, the pattern kind of reverses itself, and so it's kind of funky and haunted, and all of the things that The Shining is. That's not in the screenplay, right? The screenplay is just focused on we need this creepy thing of where the Danny sees the ball, and that's gonna like make him want to go into the room and yada yada yada. But the visual the visuals that make it really creepy were not in the screenplay. Those were things that were added after. And that's no disrespect to screenplay writing. I'm just trying to sort of paint a picture of how, again, you have the blueprint for a house, but then that doesn't tell you anything about, that only tells you what the structure is. It doesn't tell you like what sort of material is going to go on the porch or what sort of decorating happens on the inside, right? It's really just sort of like a shell. Um, so most screenplays follow what we call like a three-act narrative structure. And really, most of them do. And this is really important. And this is the type of thing that might actually repeat some of the things you could have learned in maybe literature classes or other classes that focus on story, because it's very common, right? It's a really popular narrative structure, and for good reason. Um, Basically, it's just sort of like you've got a protagonist. The protagonist needs to do some things. The protagonist runs into obstacles. There's, antics and excitement, and then there's some sort of resolution, satisfying or not, at the end, right? So that's like the basic gist of it. It's not like a rule, like thou must do this in order to write a screenplay, although our movie makes some funny comments on that. It's just sort of like a principle. It's like it's what works, right? It's what's sort of effective, and so what you see recycled over and over again. And the thing I really want to drive home, and I'm going to do this probably repeatedly throughout this whole unit, is really emphasize that part about the protagonist, because the reason this three-act structure is so effective is because what's really happening is you're following some sort of protagonist. What this is about is the characters. We want to see some sort of character transformation. If you look at probably your favorite films and ask yourself, sort of like, well, why was it good? You can come up with various reasons, but I bet that at some point there's some sort of main character going through some sort of transformation, some sort of realization. And the three-act structure really sets up that transformational process, that metamorphosis, if you will. And basically, loosely, right, you've got like you always have to have some sort of establishment, right? You have to like inform the audience, like what's going on here. Okay, in The Shining, we see that Wendy is in an abusive relationship and Jack needs a job and they're going to this creepy hotel. Act two is really 50% of the entire film is Act Two, where the main conflicts are happening, right? That's where all these obstacles are being fleshed out. And then, the climax is how I learned it. And, when I was in high school, I guess, when we're trying to figure out what the culmination is of all this, what the characters are dealing with, it loosely accounts for like another quarter of this, but those are all sort of estimates, okay? Um, because, and actually, I think I'm just gonna switch around here. Because a really important thing for you to understand is that even though, there's always this basic three-act structure, the video that you're going to watch is sort of a supplement for this lecture, really highlights how, yeah, there's this basic three acts, but the way those three acts look can be very different. So yes, it's very formulaic. You need some sort of setup, you need some sort of climax at the end, and you need characters to be going through different challenges. Otherwise, they can't really develop. They can't really become whatever they're supposed to be. But how that happens can look really different, can look and feel very different, right? So the same basic structure is just sort of like, yeah, we need to check these things off, but the ways that we check it off can look really different. The way The Godfather does, and even the pacing of it, right, feels very different from how The Dark Knight did it. But both of them have a beginning setup, a middle with lots of, conflict and drama and all that stuff, and then some sort of, exciting finale, right? Well, I would argue Dark Knight was much more exciting than The Godfather, but The Godfather was intense, man. It was intense. Um, And the supplemental video that you're going to watch, which is like 20 minutes and focuses on Jurassic Park, which is my love. You can see I've got, oh, can you see? I've got Ian Malcolm and a dinosaur in my phone case because I really like Ian Malcolm. Um, Jeff Goldblum with his shirt open, it's that whole thing. So, it's going to focus on Jurassic Park a lot, which is great. And KM Weiland, who's this very famous expert in narrative, is going to sort of talk about like why she considers it a like one of like the greatest sort of like I don't remember what her terms were. She thinks it's like just sort of like the exemplar of fantastic film storytelling. And one of the interesting points she's going to make is like you don't even have action until like the midpoint, even though it's a movie about people getting eaten by dinosaurs. And she really makes a great argument for why that is, why characters are sort of at the heart of it. You don't notice it because Spielberg and does such a good job of sort of like telling the story of these characters that okay, we can wait a while for the dinosaurs to even come in. Anyway, I hope you enjoy that. There's a lot of answers to your quiz on there. Um, and she does a much better job than me at explaining all this, which is great. I'm basically like a curator now, but I'm happy that I get to force you to watch that video. And then our next thing, I'll get into all this stuff about the film you're going to watch, which is kind of going to make fun of all this. But in the meantime, enjoy, and I will see you for the next video. So.